So how do you go about telling your employees you're thinking of selling your company? When do you tell your employees you're thinking of selling? And what's the right way to share some of the proceeds of your sale with key employees? Those are all questions I talk about with Andrew Yang in this interview. Andrew was one of the guys behind Manhattan GMAT that sold recently to Kaplan, the big 800-pound gorilla in the education prep business. It's an interesting story. Andrew was able to get more than 8 times EBITDA for the company on a clean exit without an earnout. I'll let Andrew tell you the rest of the story. Andrew, welcome to Built to Sell Radio.
Hey, John, it's a pleasure to be here.
So tell me a little bit about Manhattan GMAT. What was this company doing? What were you guys up to?
Well, those people who are familiar with the GMAT probably would imagine we were a test prep company that helped people prepare for the test to get into business school. So most of our customers were U.S. and Canada, but we had a following in Asia and Europe as well.
And so when you go through this test prep, was it a website people would go through and learn and take dummy questionnaires, that kind of stuff?
Well, we had digital offerings, we had online courses, but the bulk of our revenue and business consisted of in-person classes and tutoring with about 100 of the best teachers in the world, really. So our sweet spot was that we would identify the best test prep and GMAT instructors in the world, pay them $100 an hour base, and they had to have a 99th percentile score on the GMAT, which was a 760 out of 800. For reference, the average at Harvard Business School is a 720. So you found brilliant test takers who were phenomenal teachers, and most of that was done in person. So the bulk of our business consisted of people showing up to classes in cities around the country. And I say country. Most of our business in person was in the U.S., but we had classes in Europe and Canada.
Neat. And what got you into that? What was your journey to get to that business? Did you go to business school, and was it something that frustrated you?
So I did not. I'd taken the GMAT on a lark, which was sort of funny how big a deal that became. But I was introduced to Zeke Vanderhook in 2001, and he, at that point, was a solo GMAT tutor. We met in a Starbucks. So he'd been tutoring people on the side, and then created a following in New York and started building this company. So he asked me to work on some of the curriculum and pinch hit for him as an instructor. So I was the first non-Zeke instructor at this company. And calling it a company really is kind of aggressive because in 2001, it was Zeke and some books that he'd cobbled together. So I helped Zeke out from 2001 to 2005. And then in 2005, he approached me about becoming the CEO to take over the business for him. And at that point, the business was doing maybe around $2 million in revenue. Zeke had built a pretty big following, hired a bunch of instructors in New York and Boston and in LA. And so when I joined the company, there were about 5 full-time people along with Zeke and me.
Neat. And then, so did you become a shareholder in the business, or how did that structure work?
Well, there was a period during which Zeke and I would make sure that we worked well together. We had a lot of confidence because we'd worked together at least in some capacity for 4 or 5 years, and at this point we're friends. So there was like a year trial period, and then after that year, then I'd become a shareholder and partner in the business.
Neat. And you went on to grow the business significantly. So what was it at in terms of revenue when you decided to sell it?
So by the time the company was acquired, we were doing something like 11 million in revenue. So the business quintupled or so while I was running it, and then I was with the company post acquisition. And when I left, the company was doing about 17 million in revenue. So it continued to grow post acquisition.
And of the 11 million that you were at when you were acquired, what proportion of that was sort of live events versus the digital stuff?
At that point, the majority of it was live. classes, instruction, tutoring. We had a lot of corporate clients as well. I personally taught the analyst classes at Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, and they had a very strong preference for it being live. If I remember the breakdown approximately, it was like majority live instruction and tutoring. At that point, we had books that were for sale and are still for sale today in Barnes & Noble and Amazon, and that was a significant revenue driver. And then online classes and digital was the remainder. Was maybe 25 to 30% was digital at that point.
Got it. And so what was the trigger that made you guys want to sell?
Well, I think it's a very personal decision when people decide to exit. And I was committed 100% to Manhattan GMAT. I owe the business a ton. I owe Zeke a lot. I grew up a lot as a CEO. Anyone who's listening to this, a lot of people are running their own businesses. I think running your own business is an incredible leadership and maturation process and experience. The decision to get acquired was not something that happened quickly or lightly. So this might be fun for some people to hear. So one of the reasons why we ended up getting acquired was that folks at Kaplan. So we were growing and we became more of a thorn in Kaplan's side. And then we got a note from the general counsel at Kaplan saying, hey, there's this thing on one of your forums and it reproduces a Kaplan question and we don't like that. So, can you please take it down? And so this got forwarded
Kaplan,
to me.
for people who don't know, Kaplan was a competitor, right? They do test prep stuff.
Yeah. So Kaplan is the dominant player in test prep certainly in North America and other parts of the world. It was division of the Washington Post company, which was a publicly traded company that included media properties of various types. So the general counsel of Kaplan Test Prep reaches out and says, "Hey, this question should be on your forum, blah blah blah." And so this gets forwarded to me from one of the team members, and then I just wrote the general counsel back saying, like, sure, happy to remove it. It'll be down immediately. And maybe we'll have other more positive things to talk about sometime in the future. I was just trying to be like cordial and friendly. So the general counsel of Kaplan Test Prep saw that and then said, "Interesting. It seems like these guys are like kind of amiable, like / friendly." And so he then said to the CEO of Kaplan Test Prep, "Hey, I don't know if you want to follow up with this, but I think that the guys at Manhattan GMAT seem kind of open." So we got a call from the CEO of Kaplan, maybe 2 to 4 weeks later, saying, "Hey, would you like to have lunch?" So I then had lunch with him, and we were just talking about various things, and he wasn't doing any kind of hard sell or pitch, but what he did say was like, "Hey, you guys are building a great franchise and business, and if you ever want to do something, let us know. Like, make sure that we're in the convo. Like, don't do anything without calling me first, kind of thing." And he was a good guy, and he'd been in the business for like 17 or 20 years, and so it was enjoyable talking to him, and so we just had an open dialogue from that point on.
And so could you read through his code and decipher that he was saying, if you want to sell, call me first?
He pretty much said those words, so it wasn't like me, whipping out the, code breaker. He was pretty much like, "Look, if you guys ever want to sell, like, let us know first," was what he said.
So then take us through the period after that lunch to getting the check in your hand. What was that process like?
So
what were the
we
steps?
didn't have any interest in selling at the first lunch. So literally like a year passed, or 18 months or something. Like a lot of time passed. And during that time, we get occasional overtures from people who wanted to invest. And so there were two stakeholders. It was me and Zeke, the founder. And I was running the business at this point for like 4 years, and Zeke had started a charter school for underprivileged kids in Morningside Heights in Manhattan, which is incredible. It's like I'm a huge supporter of his school. people might find this interesting. So the reason why his school was an innovation and different is that it pays teachers $125,000 a year to start, with the premise that superior teaching leads to better results, and that in order to get superior teaching, you need to pay more. And it does this on the same budget as any other school by lifting out administrative costs and non-teacher uh, uh, staff. So Zeke, the principal, gets paid less than the teachers. Again, with the premise being that the teachers are more important than the principal anyway. So he started this school, and so he was getting further and further from the business. And so when he and I were talking about these people that wanted to invest in the business, he was looking at that saying like, well, if we take in investors, then we'll have, more people at the table, more stakeholders, more complexity. And so he said, I just as soon sell the business than take investment, because like if you're going to take investment, then it probably is going to end up leading to an eventual sale anyway. And so then he and I were talking about this, and I was like, "Do you want me to see what the interest level is?" And he said, "Sure." So at that point, I called the CEO of Kaplan and said, "Hey, you want to have lunch?" And so we had lunch a few weeks later. And then I was like, "So let's say we were open to considering something. Like, what would that look like?" And then he said, "Well, we need to do some due diligence and like spend some time and try and put together an offer." And then Zeke and I said like, "Well, let's see what they have in mind." And simultaneously, there were a couple of financial investors that were also interested in investing in us. And so we said to them, "Hey, let's say we were open to something, like, what would an offer look like?" So we thought it would be prudent to have more than one uh, potential purchaser, so you're not just like negotiating in a vacuum. So we then had both parties then try and do due diligence on us, and get a sense of our books and our operation.
And are you using an M&A professional at this point, Andrew, or are you running it all yourself?
Um, so we hired a lawyer to walk us through that process. And so that was the M&A professional, but there was no banker. There was no like shop it around. The like in our industry, there was only one strategic buyer in our opinion, which was Kaplan. The other major company in the space was struggling mightily, Princeton Review. I'm not even sure they're in business anymore. It's possible we could sell to like another type of buyer, but we felt comfortable that Kaplan was going to be the most highly interested and aggressive in terms of valuation, and because we had another financial offer, we never hired a banker.
So how did the three offers compare when you looked at them?
So the strategic offer is typically higher than the financial offer.
And was that the case in yours?
Yes, it was. It was, which in some ways was disappointing, because I was kind of attracted to the idea of like taking in some money and then trying to expand. But the strategic, in this case, Kaplan's offer was significantly higher, and so then it became it became clear that if we were going to sell, then Kaplan was the obvious choice.
Can you give folks a sense of how much better? Was it 10% better, 20% better, 50% better, just for a frame of reference?
Sure. It was hang on, let me rewind. It was like 40 or 50% higher than the financial. So it was non-competitive that way. And then the financial then said like, well, all these things can happen, and you retain a share, and then if like company grows to like be even bigger, and you get like paid even more, blah blah blah. And I liked the financial buyers. I'm actually still friends with those guys to this day. I was a little disappointed that that their bid was uh, too low to be competitive.
And so the Kaplan offer on a multiple of earnings, can you give us a sort of rough idea where it was at on a multiple of earnings?
Sure. So it's for our industry, like the standard was somewhere in like the high single digits of EBITDA. So it'd be like 8x would be, I think, something around the industry standard around that time. And so like we ended up a bit higher than that, and felt comfortable that was fair.
Got it. Got it. And how did you come up with the industry standard, by the way? What was your source for that data?
We I have a bunch of friends who are M&A types. I was actually, so this is something that's going to be very uncommon for people listening to this. I was a mergers and acquisitions attorney myself for like 5 minutes.
For 5 minutes.
For 5 months, but it felt like longer. But so so there were people I could talk to in the business and the industry. Like, I'm here in New York. Like, I have banker friends. I was like, hey, this kind of business. Like, what are you looking at? That sort of thing.
Got it. So what was you've seen this from the other side, but what was the due diligence period like? So you accepted the Kaplan offer, better than 8 times earnings, sounded like a great offer. Talk to us about the period between the LOI getting signed and the actual check clearing.
So the due diligence was actually super painful, and this will probably be the case for anyone listening. So there was a good chance the deal was going to fall through. We were competing with Kaplan, on a daily basis, and so we tried to keep the process confidential. So out of all of the documents they needed and things, like, I was essentially producing them all myself for a while. It was super painful. And we had a culture of openness and transparency. So the fact that I felt like I was uh, engaging in some form of mild subterfuge with my door closed pained me every day. And getting the documentation in order was not a small task. I mean, it was like days and days, and I'd be like asking people like, "Hey, our purchase records from 2 years ago, like what do those look like, and like how would how would one get one of those?" And people would look at me like, I can investigate that for you, and be like, yeah. So you have all sorts of weird conversations with people, and like they're looking at you like, what is going on? And so you want to just be open because you feel ridiculous, but you wouldn't want to get people distracted and preoccupied, which would be very human and natural. So instead, you just try and absorb as much of that as you can onto yourself. At least that's what we did, and it was a painstaking process. Yeah, it took weeks.
How did you eventually tell the employees?
So we only told the employees after we knew it was done, like where they said like, okay, here's the deal, and it's happening, and we were confident that all was going to happen. And even then, when we told them, we're like, look, there's a chance something falls through, but this is the way things are heading. And one reason why we were comfortable sharing this is that Zeke and I put aside a bonus pool for employees. We had a spreadsheet that we then input things like seniority and contribution and like past compensation and things like that, and then had it like arrive at sums for every employee and instructor, and so that so people had, I'm sure, very mixed feelings about this news, but it was accompanied by like a personal reward for each of them, and so I'm sure that made things go down a lot easier.
And so, this was a total surprise that there was some cash in it for them, that this was never promised to them?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So how did you reveal, who got what? Was it a public spreadsheet, or did everybody get a little envelope, or what was that like?
Everyone got an envelope. I met with people individually, or I called them and I said, hey, this is what's happening. Thank you for making it possible. We wouldn't be here without you. We'd like to include you in the realization of value for the company. And so, we've, input certain, we've taken into account how long you've been here and what you've done, everything. And we've arrived at this. So this is here's a check for this amount, or check's on the way, or it's going to be deposited in your account.
And give us a frame of reference, Andrew. I mean, what were those checks like? Were they hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars? Just a frame of reference would be great.
Sure. They ranged between like hundreds of dollars, someone who hadn't been there very long and like, was like a very junior staffer, to tens of thousands of dollars, like high tens of thousands. I think like at least a couple were in the six figures. So I'm thinking about it. Certainly, like I know one person used it to like as a down payment for their house, which I'm very happy about because like he's got a very beautiful family. So yeah.
What were the deal proceeds what proportion of the deal proceeds did you choose to share with your employees?
Um, we put, oh man, let me remember. Hang on. Um, I believe we put, I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember what I actually realized. I think we put approximately 10% in the bonus pool for employees, I believe. Hang on. So sorry, I'm struggling with this a little bit. Um, Somewhere between 10 and 20%. It might have been higher than 10. Oh man, sorry about this. It's been a little while. I mean, I don't want to like overstate anything. So let's say 10% for argument's sake, and then I'll try and remember a
Got
little
it.
more.
Got it. And then the rest of the proceeds were for you and Zeke, or did you have other investors at the table at that point?
We did not have any other investors, so it was me and Zeke.
Got it. Got it. So the emotions of telling your employees, I mean, was that an emotional experience for you? Describe that experience if you could.
Yeah, it was very emotional. I mean, I felt like I was the leader of this organization and group of people, and people who are listening to this who run businesses. You feel like you're kind of the head of an extended family, and the extended family is generally like on the same page and mission aligned and oriented, and you're like pulling for each other. And as the owner, you have a lot of discretion, and so and in our case, we were selling to a competitor, so these were like we identified ourselves as the righteous, underdog army, like beating up the big corporate, and so saying like, hey, we're selling to the big corporate, is in some ways tough news to deliver, and I felt like, and even though it's ridiculous, like I felt a little bit like I was uh, like sort of going back on something that we'd tacitly come together and understood. And so it was very difficult for me personally, though people didn't receive it like. I mean, people who'd been there and were in senior roles like were very much like, "What does this mean for me?" kind of thing, and like it was very heavy, and they had to process it. But so most people did not receive it as like there's more sort of what does this mean kind of bewilderment more than anything else. There was no like anger or rancor or anything like that directed to me at during these conversations. But certainly I felt like if someone had been upset, I would have understood.
Got it. Of the offer a little bit better than 8 times earnings or more than 8 times earnings, what portion of that was at risk in the form of an earnout?
None. It was a very unusual deal in that they just said, "Look, we want to make this as clean as possible." Yeah.
And yet you stayed on for a period to help them realize some growth. How long did you stay on in the?
I agreed to stay for 2 years, and that was part of the deal. I signed like an employment agreement. They allowed me to leave before the end of that agreement because I was leaving to start a nonprofit called Venture for America. And I told the CEO, hey, I want to start this organization. I'm happy to work through the rest of my contract. And then he was very frank and said, look, man, we want you to be like happy and motivated. And if you're heading this other direction, then we just as soon work on a transition sooner rather than later, which was a favor to me. So, so I left a bit before the 2 years.
What would you do differently if you had the whole sale? I mean, it sounds as you describe it, a reasonably good experience. Are there one or two things you might do differently if you had it to do over again?
Um, in the scheme of things, it was like a really good process, and we were lucky that we didn't have to hire a banker. I think hiring bankers kind of stinks. um, though most people who are listening to this who run businesses, you don't have natural buyers or like relationships. Like you might have to enlist someone to shop the company. I'm glad we got to avoid that, so I'm very pleased about that. Um, uh, this is just an aside, but like, I found out years after the fact that there was one person that was upset. I did not know that. And so, if I could do something differently, I would have tried to address it with that particular individual, to a higher level. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of in terms of regrets. The process went really as well as someone could have hoped.
What were they upset about?
They felt like that they were not not being treated as well as that they'd merited, and he was in like a very distinct situation where he was working on this like new initiative for the company, and so it ended up not working out post acquisition, and so he felt very slighted after the fact, and that's something that I could have done a better job with.
So that helps. What are you doing now? It sounds like you've gone on to start this not for profit. Maybe just talk a little bit about that if you could.
Oh my God! I think the people on this podcast are going to love the heck out of this. So what hit me throughout my career in test prep and my time as an unhappy lawyer was that we had tons of smart kids becoming bankers, consultants, and lawyers in this professional services layer, and not enough actually building and starting businesses around the country. And I thought that was going to be a total train wreck disaster over time. um, and so I became convinced that the problem is that we're not actually making entrepreneurship a visible path to young people. So the joke I tell, but it's totally true, if you want to go to law school, your parents think it's a great idea, it's easy to find, and the government will give you a $100,000 loan, no questions asked. If you want to start your own business, your parents will think it's a terrible idea, it's super hard to find and execute, and no one's going to give you $100,000. So there's no mystery that we have tens of thousands of surplus law school graduates every year and not enough entrepreneurs. So I started this organization, Venture for America, to recruit top college graduates who want to learn how to build businesses. And we pair them with entrepreneurs for 2 years in cities around the US that could use the talent. So we're in Baltimore, Detroit, St. Louis, Cleveland, Denver, like other cities around the country. So if you're listening to this podcast and you want a lieutenant, like someone to grow with the business, you can reach out to Venture for America, and we'd love to help make that happen, because we need more of our young, talented people coming to work for you and learning to build a business the way you learned, rather than all becoming transaction processors and PowerPoint jocks and contract editors. So I started this nonprofit after I left Manhattan GMAT. I put in $120K of my own to seed the organization, and our budget was $200,000 that first year in 2011. And this year, our budget is pushing $5 million. So we've grown a lot. We had 1,500 applicants for 120 spots last year on the fellowship side. So the young people want this really bad. We just need to give it to them, and then with their help, we can train the next generation of entrepreneurs and rebuild the economy and society.
What a fantastic, fantastic mission! And I noticed that both you and Zeke have chosen your new ventures to be very purpose driven. They don't sound like they're profit driven. Talk to us about that. There are a lot of entrepreneurs that would say, you sell one business, you go start another one. I mean, you never finish. But for you, it seems like money has become less of a motivator. Maybe could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And this actually goes back to Manhattan GMAT very much so, because I felt committed to Manhattan GMAT, and I felt like if I left it, I'd be leaving behind people that I worked with for years and that relied upon me in various ways. So in a way, it would have been very hard to leave Manhattan GMAT to go work for another company, I guess I could have started another company and maybe tried to hire some people, though there was a non-solicitation, so I couldn't even do that. But at least for me, I felt like if I needed to do something really positive that I could be proud of as the next step. In part because I felt so committed to that group of people that if I was going to leave, I wanted to do something that people felt really excited about.
But you could have started another business, right? Like you could have started another profitable, like a for-profit business that you would end up being just as proud of. So, but for some reason,
I could
you chose not to. But maybe get inside your head a little bit on that.
Sure. I mean, part of it is that when I was at Manhattan GMAT, I saw so many smart, ambitious, energetic young people that were lost, that did not know why they were doing what they were doing. And I referenced the fact that I personally taught the analyst classes at these banks consulting firms, and I saw so many of them that were taking the GMAT to go to business school just to figure it out. And business school is an expensive way to figure it out. I mean, that's like $100K in loans that you'll then, like turn to a very lucrative position to help pay off. And I remember that vividly because I had the same thing in law school. I got $100K in debt, went and was an M&A lawyer for 5 minutes. So because I was exposed to this over and over again, and so many young people over a period of years, it just made me think the biggest problem I could address was channeling those young people to parts of the economy and society that would benefit. And I would have been happy for it to be a business. I just couldn't think of a way to make that thing a for-profit, because you can't charge startups and small businesses tens of thousands to hire someone. Because when I was at Manhattan GMAT, if someone said, "Hey, I've got this, bright, aspiring 22-year-old who wants to work for you, but you need to pay me $20,000 to pay for the cost of recruiting them, like et cetera," I'd be like, "How about I not pay you?" So I would have loved for it to be a business, and I'm optimistic that there's a business within Venture for America's activities that if we create enough value, we can start earning revenue. Like this year, our revenue is around $250,000, which for a $5 million organization is not like a huge amount, but is like a good start. So I'm with you in the sense that I love businesses. I think businesses make the world go around and create most of the opportunities. And I would love to be involved with business myself still, and I am in various ways. But for this particular problem, I just couldn't think of a way to solve it that wasn't a nonprofit. And I think making it a nonprofit was the right path because we've accomplished a lot the last 5 years or so.
It sounds like it. And tell us a little bit about Smart People Should Build Things. Where did that book come in this journey?
Sure. So I was raising money for Venture for America, and I was making the case that we had like way too much talent going to big banks and other places. And I was telling a lot of the same stories repeatedly. And then I was featured in Fast Company as one of the most creative people in business a few years ago. And so then a literary agent reached out to me and said, "Hey, you should write a book." And then I said, "I don't have time to write a book. I'm sort of working on something." But as we made progress, like a year later, it's a theme. Maybe I come back to things a year later. But a year later, I thought, maybe I should explore the book because I find myself putting forward the same ideas so consistently that maybe a book would help people to understand the importance of Venture for America. I saw it as like a good tool for the organization. So it was published by HarperCollins last year. I was on Morning Joe and Fox and a bunch of programs to promote it. But it's about how we have too few entrepreneurs. Like we have too many of some things, not enough entrepreneurs, and that it's completely predictable why this is. And that as a society, we can't rely upon anomalies to save us. We have to build an effective system to cultivate our talent in ways that will actually lead to the economy that we want to see. So that's what the book's about. The book's about the ideas behind Venture for America and the founding of the organization.
Andrew Yang, thanks for joining us.
No, thanks so much, John. Pleasure.
This video was produced by our God tier patrons, Manuel Carrillo III and Bradley Davis. Become a producer of the show today.
Yang Gang 2020. Yang Gang 2020. Yang gang. Yeah.